perhaps we are going to start. So again, please choose the language. And so as you already know, this webinar and the following session scheduled on May 27 will be dedicated to development, implementation, and evaluation of the program called the Choices, Voices, Promises, developed by Save the Children. This program challenged harmful gender norms and encouraged gender equitable attitudes and beliefs during early adolescence, 10 to 14 years. The goal of the program is to empower early adolescents to challenge the accepted gender norms in their community that also can be risk factors for violence. Choices, Voices, Promises has been adapted and implemented in many different countries, in many different contexts, in Bangladesh, Bolivia, Egypt, Ethiopia, Kyrgyzstan, Nepal. And today we have a great opportunity to have with us Brett Kerner from Save the Children, who will cover the design and implementation of Choices, Voices, and Promises. And he's actually the original designer of this program in Nepal. So just a short reminder, please close your microphones during the presentation. We will have 2 hours together with a 10 minutes break after the first hour. And as usual, we will have a few spaces for your questions and answers. So please, Brett.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate being here, and it's a privilege I see 47 people on the line, so that's really exciting. What I see on my screen is the full presentation and 4 different people. So I don't think I can see the chat box. So what I'm gonna ask you to do is, if you have a question or you have something to say or you need me to go slower, chat it in there. And Diana, maybe you could filter some of those, save questions for the question period, and feel free to tell me to slow down. That is totally fine. So yeah, my name is Brad Kerner. I have been at Save the Children for almost 17 years. When I first started, I was on our adolescent sexual and reproductive health team. But being a man working in that field, I have always had this gendered lens to sexual and reproductive health. And before coming to Save the Children, I always worked with men and boys on these issues. So I brought some of that thinking to my work here 17 years ago. And the more and more I was doing this kind of work on sexual and reproductive health, the more and more I knew it was really important to tackle the issue of gender and gender norms as some of the underlying determinants of sexual and reproductive health outcomes. So the great thing about being at Save the Children, I got to innovate and explore different ideas, and I did get some funding to develop this package that I was working on in my head for a couple of years. So it was in 2009 that we first started developing and designing Choices, and then the rest, you'll see the history as it comes. Oh, and maybe I'll also say, there we go. So here's how we'll roll through this presentation today. It's my little roadmap. I'll just quickly present the problem and opportunity in Nepal, where we started this work, some of the background, the approaches we use to develop Choices and Voices and Promises. Well, I'll dig a little deeper into the intervention itself, so you can see what it looked like, what it feels like. And then I'll show you a little bit of the results of the implementation research. I'm not going to show you any of the impact or outcome results, but I am going to show you the implementation fidelity results. So here's what we plan to do, and here's what really happened. Here's how many kids really came, etc. And that way, when you come to the next presentation, you're primed up with Dr. Lundgren, who was our principal investigator who led the impact study, and you'll see those results. So to set the scene in Nepal, oops, I didn't realize. I think some of you might be from Nepal or work close to Nepal. We work in so many countries around the world to save the children, but I chose to work with Nepal because I was already supporting a sexual and reproductive health program there for adolescents. And we all know the statistics of early marriage and early childbearing in this country. Millions of girls are married and betrothed when they're quite young. They often go and live with their husbands and husbands' families after their first menstruation. And typically they are having children within a year of their marriage, well, within a year of moving in with their husband. And that is often as low as 15, 16 years old. And, you know, a lot of this is rooted in culture. It's rooted in tradition, and that culture and tradition doesn't always put women in power positions and allow them to have voice and decision-making within their homes. And so, you know, again, reproductive health outcomes have a lot to do with the gender norms that are presented in a culture and in a society. So we thought, how could we tackle some of those norms with the adolescents themselves? Because they're not necessarily the ones choosing to get married. These are more arranged marriages and part of culture and tradition. So how do we do that? And that was kind of the problem we wanted to solve. So just to look at that again quickly, we know that women and girls face a lot of discrimination and violence based on their sex, but also their caste and ethnicity. So in Nepal, they have the caste system, they have different ethnicities, and depending on which one you identify with and where you live, there could be higher levels of discrimination. This will limit girls' ability to participate in school, in the family and community life, and different economic opportunities. So the opportunity I saw, and again, remember my job mandate was working with adolescents, and that starts at 10 years old, and it goes all the way through 19 years old. And my work also often spilled into the early 20s. So the opportunity I saw was working with that younger set of adolescents before they were married, before they were in relationships, you know, trying to set up some pro-social behaviors and norms. And there weren't many people working with this age group, and I thought it should be something that Save the Children really prioritized. This is a time when gender norms are not set yet. 10 to 14, it's like those early puberty years where adolescents are still exploring their values. They're still thinking about, what does it mean to be a girl? What does it mean to be a boy? How does that fit in my society? And if I change those things, what will my neighbors say about me? So I saw this as a great opportunity. It's a great window to work with young people at that age, the 10 to 14-year-olds. And I couldn't find anything out there that was really thinking about gender transformation with the younger adolescents in an age-appropriate way. What I did know about this age group, having worked with them already, was that they don't have as much agency and control over their own decision-making as does my own. I have a 7-year-old, I have an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old. The 13-year-old, I'm letting him make a few more decisions on his own and giving him a bit more freedom, but not as much as my 11-year-old, because they're still at those early adolescent years where they don't get to control all those decisions. They have voice in some of them. So when thinking about gender norms and how to transform those for this age group, you really also need to be thinking about the parents. And you also need to be thinking about the community in which parents live and how all that kind of interacts and shapes the decisions being made at the household level. So that's how this all started. That's how the brainstorming and the thinking started. So what I'm alluding to was taking this socio-ecological approach to transform gender norms. So how do you work with boys and girls if they're at the center of everything you want to do? And that's one of Save the Children's missions, that children are at the center of the work we do, and we should be working directly with them. So I said, okay, well, I want to create a curriculum, something that is led by a trusted adult with peer leaders, child peer leaders, that's going to help get them to think differently about what it means to be a boy or girl. But that's just not enough, because you have two other layers of the society that's interacting those outcomes and those behaviors of adolescence. So after developing choices, we then went and developed voices for parents, which are really listening to the voices of other parents and changes they've made, but then also promises, which is, we'll get there. I don't even know how to describe promises in a very succinct way, but it is a behavior change approach to have more mass influence on what people would do and say to their kids. So we'll get there. But the most important part is working at these different layers of a socio-ecological model. So because I am the person who developed all this, I was thinking, how can I develop these in a way that are really based on behavior change knowledge, that are a bit creative and fun for young adolescents, but also for parents. I just wanted to think outside the box. It was an innovation. It was innovation funding. So I wanted to be able to just work differently. And so I got to have a lot of fun with this. So I want to show you the different ways and theories we use to develop all these different packages. So I've already told you about the socio-ecological theory, that you can't work in isolation with just boys and girls. You need to work with their families and their communities. But I decided to also take an emotion-based behavior change approach. And I was doing some reading and research. I was actually looking at the commercial sector. You know, how does Coca-Cola or Pepsi or these big, packaged consumer goods, we call them, how do these big companies that sell all these products to us, what's the approach they do to get us to say yes to using their products? And by and large, they are emotion-based approaches. They appeal to our emotions, and this is how they try to get us to move towards the change. So I just love this quote, that we are thinking machines, we are not thinking machines. We are feeling machines that think. I just thought it's an interesting quote, something I really liked. So how do you do that? How do you get to the heart of the matter? How do you speak to people that gets their emotions triggered? So I'm going to give you an example of what emotion-based approach sounds like. So we do a lot of work here around school and keeping girls in school. And this statement here, and the way a lot of us do the work, can be a very logical approach. So when like an NGO worker comes to a village and tells everyone, you need to keep girls in school, because if you do that, they're less likely to get married and become pregnant. And then that will be how they won't die during childbirth, because we all know that young girls less than 15 are 5 times more likely to die during childbirth, and girls who are 16 to 18 are 2 times more likely to die during childbirth. So if you keep your girls in school, they won't get married, they won't get pregnant, and they're more likely to thrive. That message is is a logical-based message. You are giving facts to people that are true. You're trying to appeal to logic. But it's just not how many people make decisions, honestly. We store that information. It makes us feel good when we choose a certain behavior, that it links to some sort of logic and some sort of rationale and fact. But often when you're in a village or in a community, throwing facts out of people, it's kind of like this dog, in one ear, out the other, thinking about my shopping list, thinking about what I have to do after this meeting, and I'm not really moved. I might not even remember a lot of the facts. And when I go home and someone asks me, tell me about that meeting, what did you hear? I might not remember much of it. So I'm going to show you a different approach, which is emotional reasoning. How do you get people and give them recognition for the changes they're going to make and want to make? How do you tap into something that makes them feel, like they have chills running down their spine? So like, if you keep your daughters in school, what are they going to say about you when they grow up to their peers, their kids? And these are kind of the messages we were hearing that we put into some of these posters and promises. Our daughters, this is what the parents were telling us, our daughters will thank us one day and be proud of us as parents for allowing her to complete her education. So this idea of being proud, being thanked, it gives recognition to the parents for the good work they're doing. Our own daughter will be recognized as a role model. This is that pride, the status, the recognition. These are what we call the emotional hot buttons that we were trying to work towards to get parents to make these kind of decisions. So same message, keep girls in school, but of two very different approaches. So I'm going to show you some ways in which we elicited some of these emotions so we knew how to design the program. A lot of us, you might have heard about formative research. That is research you do to develop an intervention. And I led a lot of the formative research for this. And I really wanted to choose methods that will elicit and help me understand what are those emotions that will get parents to tick, get kids to tick, that will get them to say, if I can trigger that emotion, they're much more likely to do this behavior that I'm wanting. So focus group discussions, we threw them out. In-depth interviews, too boring, we threw them out. We wanted things that were a bit different, that didn't allow people to think so logically. If you want to get to the emotional aspects, you have to go to the other side of the brain and use techniques that will do that. And I call these projective techniques. So the reason I got rid of some of the focus group discussions and some of those other techniques is because they often advantage the adult in terms of communication, knowledge, and skills. So you have this adult who's presenting themselves as much smarter than everyone else with all the fancy smart questions, trying to get to see what answers you're going to give. And they've been trained in this, they're so good at it. We wanted to shift that power a little bit. We wanted to shift power and put it in the hands of those who are answering the questions so they could tap into this emotion aspect and we can get more real feelings from people. When you start asking logical questions, people know what you want to hear. They know what answers to give you. And you ask, we used to say, if you ask a straightforward question, you're going to get a straightforward lie. When you ask something that's a little bit different and hard to understand, you get the truth because they really have to think through how they want to answer those questions. So let me show you what that looks like. I'll give you another example. So Freud, famous psychiatrist, he developed this idea of a projective technique. It's when you're actually projecting your emotions, your thoughts, your feelings onto another person or an object. In this case, we used objects. So he went as far as to say that you are taking your subconscious and projecting it onto these objects that we were presenting. Next slide. Okay. Just to show you, again, through my research, I keep talking about the emotional hot buttons or those emotional triggers. In the work that I was reading, I found 15 universal emotions that I thought, the research says there's 15 universal emotions across all cultures and countries. These are the emotions that get people to move if you want to tap them for behavior change. The ones that I thought would work most for gender norm change are the ones that we had boxes around. A sense of belonging to your community, a sense of status, achievement, recognition. These are the same emotions of why some people tend to do things like early marriage. If everyone is sending their daughters to school early, you want to belong. If people are shaming you for not marrying your daughter early, you don't want to lose that status with them. So these are just some of the things that also can work against you, because they are the emotions that are getting people to stay with some of these not so pro-social behaviors. I'm going to show you a couple more techniques we used. With the children, we again decided not to do focus group discussions, because when you get a group of 5, 6, 7, 8 adolescents together talking, they, because of their age and what's going through in their minds, they start caring more about what their friends think of what they're saying than telling the truth. So the way we wanted to enable the truth to come out was to pick one child to be interviewed and then say, go get your best friend. Go choose your best friend. And that will enable you to feel comfortable. It will also, for us, what we found is it enabled a bit of accountability between the best friends. So when one friend started kind of like lying, they're not really lying, but if someone was saying, oh yeah, my dad, he washes all the dishes in the house, a best friend often can come out and say, what are you talking about? Your dad's never home. You know, they're more willing to challenge their friend when they're not telling the truth. So we found that approach also lends itself well for this emotion-based approach. We also used emotion cards and color cards to enable children to tap into emotions. They might not know how they're feeling about something. So when we were doing interviews, for example, we might say to a bunch of boys, when your sister was married off when she was quite young, choose a picture here that might show how you felt, which is a lot easier for young people and adults, frankly, to do than if you just ask a straightforward question that says, tell me how you felt when so-and-so got married off. It feels too personal. But if you allow them to project how they felt onto pictures of other people, it helps a little bit get the truth. It also helps them have a fuller range of emotions. You know, like you have just a fuller range. These are kids that we found in Nepal while we were there. And we asked them we didn't bring these pictures with us. We took them while we were there and we said, look, show us a picture of you happy. Show us you confused. And we would take these pictures and show it to them and see if they would allow us to use these. So we really try to get a range of emotions. Another thing we did was use these colors. So we would present to them scenarios like, here's a picture of a bunch of boys playing volleyball. We had a picture of boys playing netball. And we said, imagine if this girl went over and started playing with them. Choose a color that would describe what the other boys would say or how they would feel. And so we were playing around a bit like that with them. Trying to get them to tap a little bit into what it might feel like or what someone would say without them directly having to say what they would, in this hypothetical situation. Hope this is making some sense. It's a lot easier when I'm using those tools with people. But again, presenting scenarios to people. Let me see what I have here. Yeah, I'll stay here for a sec. Presenting scenarios and then having them choose colors. I'm going to go back one more slide because I forgot to show you this one. In this picture, you see those plastic animals. Now, we used a lot of animals to help them project thoughts onto people in their community. So we would start with when you think about your teachers, choose an animal that describes your teacher. So one would choose a hen. Oh, why did you choose that hen? Well, they're they take care of us, they teach us, they protect us. They would say all these things. And then we would try to get down to what we really wanted to know, which is the difference between men and women, fathers, mothers. Tell me about dads in your community. What are the dads like? One boy chose a rooster. Oh, cool. Tell us about the rooster. Well, my dad walks around eating all the seed without respect of anyone else. It's whatever he wants, whenever he wants. Okay. It it was almost like we could have ended the interview right there. Like we got enough information from him. We didn't need to go through an hour-long focus group discussion. We asked a simple question. We said choose an animal, and it was a little easier for us. Instead of being like, what is your dad like? Tell us what your dad is like. Choose an animal that describes the dads in your community. Clearly he was telling us about his father, but it was a little safer for him to not have to speak so directly about his father. So all those are just different types of projective techniques. They are ways in which you can project your thoughts and feelings onto other objects and pictures and colors. So, because we were developing a program in which we wanted to empower girls, we wanted to make sure we were also talking to boys. Here you can see another technique we use. The pictures they have in front of them are doors and windows. We did a lot of visualization exercises with them. Like, imagine you were going through this door, and inside those doors, all the hopes and dreams for you and all the boys in your school, your lives. Tell us what you see. And then we would compare it to, well, now imagine your sisters. Like, what kind of door would they choose? What's behind their door? Is it different than yours? Is it the same? I also just love the way this older facilitator, after going through the training, and we talked about shifting power and really allowing children to express themselves. I just love the way he was laying down, because he was physically trying to put himself below them so they felt more powerful. It was just great. It was an amazing way to get these boys to feel comfortable and like they're dominant in their decisions and what they have to tell us. So I thought it was great. But we just knew that we needed to work with these boys. We needed to hear them, because we knew we wouldn't have any women and girls empowerment without bringing men and boys along a journey to reflect on gender norms. And the research is already there for that. We already know from the research that improved and sustained attitudes and behaviors related to sexual and reproductive health and maternal health and newborn health and child health is sustained and improved when men and boys are engaged and thinking about gender. And the same is true about violence against women. So we've learned a lot of this. It's in the research. So we wanted to make sure in developing our program, we were also developing something that men and boys were going to be reflecting on their own gender norms. Okay. Again, I'm just going to keep telling you about different techniques we used that linked to both emotion-based messaging and techniques, and just how to get different kinds of information from people to help us design our interventions. So this was another theory we used called the influence principles. Influence, it's defined as the process of guiding someone to a new attitude, idea, or action. But it's ethical, it's not manipulative. I can't say that word well. Meaning you're not manipulating people to change, you're influencing them in an ethical way to get them to think of something new, to see something new. And there's been a lot of research on this, again, in the commercial marketing world. People who spend lots of money with social psychologists so they can figure out how to do a commercial or a product launch and sell their products and make a lot of money. It's not always used in the social sector, but it should be, because Coca-Cola sells a lot of Coke everywhere around the world. And so if they figured out how to do that, why can't we use those same techniques to keep girls in school, to delay early marriage, for example? So 6 different influence principles that have been studied highly. There's that book, Yes, 50 Scientifically Proven Ways to Be Persuasive. This is the book I read. Robert Cialdini is the researcher, author. Study his work. It's really, really helpful. There's 6 different influence principles we infused into some of the work we did, but I'm going to show you 2 of them today. One is called consensus, and the other one is called consistency and commitment. So the influence principle of consensus. Consensus, I think you've all heard about it. So everyone's kind of going along with the flow. People decide what is appropriate for them to do in any situation by examining what other people do. Going along with the flow. We make so many decisions every single day. Do we have the time to quickly think through every little decision? No. Sometimes we just go with the flow. This is what everyone else is doing. I think I'll do the same thing. It seems appropriate. If everyone else is doing it, it seems appropriate. This could work against us. It could work for us. And, you know, sometimes if everyone's doing something that's not so great, people will go along with that flow. But we want to also, we have to think about how to make it seem like the behavior we want people to do is what everyone is doing. You know, another way to look at this. I'm going to give you an example of a consensus that I saw in that book that I read. And it's this example on a study that is done from a teen smoking study. They're trying to see what does it take to get kids not to smoke cigarettes. Well, what they found is if their parents smoke, they're 26 times more likely to smoke. They see it every day. They think it's appropriate. They're going along with the flow. Their parents do it. Maybe they'll do it too. If they have two friends that smoke, they're 1,000 times more likely to do it. One, this shows how influential friends are at this age. And this idea of consensus, this idea of wanting to fit in, this idea of status, recognition. If your friends are doing it, you want to fit in with them. And you can see one more friend, one more friend who smokes, and the likelihood you smoke is going to go up so much more if you're a teenager. So again, this idea of fitting in, doing what other people do, it's very powerful. So to say to a father, we really want you to not marry your daughter off. Well, if every other person in his neighborhood is marrying the daughters off, it's going to take a very strong person to go against that flow and against the grain, against the fabric of their society and say, I'm not going to do that. So what you need to do in a program like this to influence people to change is highlight how many people are not marrying off their daughters. There are a ton of people, especially in Nepal in these communities. The majority of girls are not being married off, actually. What happens is you get a pocket, one group of people who are doing it, and you need to show them the alternative and make them feel like, actually, most people are not marrying off their daughters. Most people are actually keeping their daughters in school, and start working towards that change, making them feel like that's what most people are doing. And it's doing it in a truthful way. I'm going to now show you consistency and commitment. Again, very powerful. People are much more likely to be moved in a particular direction if they see that it is consistent with an existing or recent commitment. So if they committed to doing something out loud, told people about it, they're much more likely to do it. For example, this might be a bad example. My wife last night told me, I'm going to wake up in the morning and go for a run and work out. She didn't actually, her alarm went off and she didn't get up and do it. But because she told me and made that commitment, I said, hey, aren't you going to get out and go do that run that you said you would do? And she had a whole bunch of excuses. The idea, though, is because she told me, because she wants to do it, and she's verbal about it, she's much more likely to be consistent with that commitment. Today she wasn't, but if she tonight says, you know what, I'm going to try again tomorrow, I might say, hey, you said that yesterday. Do you really think you're going to do this? Come on, let's see. I'll do it with you, maybe. Once people start really committing to it and telling other people, they're much more likely to do it. So in a case of keeping daughters in school, instead of doing the logic-based, if you keep her in school, she's going to be more educated, she'll be more likely to not get married. Better to just say, look, let's talk about how you might keep your daughter in school. What are the things you'll need to do? Share those plans with your neighbor. Let's actually have you sit with your neighbor and you guys talk about ways in which you could keep them in school. What plans do you have? Once they start articulating those plans, then it becomes real. Once they say, actually, now I really want to commit to this. I'm actually saying to you, my neighbor, I'm doing this. Once they make those commitments, they're much more likely to do it. So again, very influential ways, very influential principles that are evidence-based, have been studied, and it just takes a bit of creativity of how do you get that into a social norm program. So I think what I'll do is stop here. And so we can have some question and answer before I get into the exactly what is choices, what is voices, what is promises. I wanted everyone to learn a little bit about how we develop them, what are some of the theories behind it, because often that is the key to something that's successful or not. And later you'll see the results, and we were quite successful. So I could either stop sharing my screen for the question and answer time or...
Yeah, perhaps so we can see each other. It could
Sure.
be,
there we go.
Nice. So thank you very much for this first part. I think it was very interesting and kind of change of the point of view when you're speaking about the emotion approach more than the rational approach.
Yep.
It's a good thing to learn, and comparing with campaigns done by Coca-Cola or Nike, what we all have in mind. So definitely we have to inspire from it.
Lots of people end up asking questions about these techniques as they're so new. And so, even if you don't know anything about the intervention, it's okay to ask those questions. See what I did there? Consensus, trying to influence you to ask questions.
In a positive, empowering way.
Yes. There's always, that reminds me of something I read in the book. So the book, if you ever get that book, it's the examples they give are not from the sectors we work in. They're just from, for commercial marketing people and psychology. But it's just so interesting. I was reading, I remember an example around consensus. So when you're in like a hotel, let's say, you have to go from where you live over to another place for work, and they put you up in this hotel, and all of a sudden, every day they're coming and giving you a new bar of soap wrapped in plastic, and they're taking away the old one, or they're washing all the towels and washing the sheets. I always found that I was always curious about that, because at home I like to use my soap until it's done. And I don't wash my bed sheets every day because I'd be exhausted if I did that. So I always wondered, why are they doing so much washing? But no one tells them not to do it. Well, it's not great for the environment. And so there was a campaign, an environmental campaign, to try and get hotels not to wash so much, because that soap can be toxic and it's just so much wasted water. So they tested out different signs that they put into rooms to get people to inform the people who clean to not take their towels away. So something that said, if you don't want your towel to be washed, please place it on the rack. So they did something like that. They got some people to do it. Then they tried another sign out that said, many people in this hotel keep their towels for 3 days at a time. That actually, just changing that message got people to, and so please hang your towel on the rack if you don't want them to take it away. It had a 50% increase in getting people to put their towel on the rack. And then they changed one more word, and it went way up, and it said, people just like you who stay at this hotel are keeping their towels for 3 to 4 days and putting it on the rack. And that got people to think like, oh, people just like me, like I want to be part of those people too. And so simple wording in messaging really can change people's behaviors as well. Has anyone ever used these types of methods or techniques to hear the voices of people we're working with? Has anyone ever done focus group discussions? I think a lot of us do focus group discussions.
Yes, a projective technique, it's very...
It's a bit different. I mean, you could do them in a focus group discussion, It just depends what the topic is. And I find that when I learned how to do focus group discussions when I was getting my public health degree and we were doing the qualitative methods class, I think if you remember, you learn a focus group discussion is like a funnel. You start really broad and you get people comfortable and you work your way down to those questions you really want to know. And that could take a whole hour or so to get everyone comfortable. Well, when I started learning about these projective techniques, the person who taught me said, why would you waste an hour to get to hear what you want to hear when you can get it in 2 minutes? Just ask, pick an animal. Oh, I'd love to hear more about where you live and in your house. Choose an animal that reminds you of your mom and one that reminds you of your dad. And the things they say are so powerful, so powerful.
Merci beaucoup. Je suis Benet Kibate.
Thank you very much. I'm Benet Kibate of the RDC. Thank you sincerely for this interesting presentation, because it corresponds a bit on what we're doing in the field. And thank you very much for your experience. When we actually have to speak about the socialization norms for boys and girls, our key issue in terms of gender inequality, we think about the techniques that we should use. And I would like to, maybe as a moderator, I would like to understand what have you identified? How did you approach in a given area or region? And then what have been the main changes that you have witnessed? I understand that social norms are the most difficult, and that certainly requires a lot of time, because before you can actually achieve results. But I work on given problems with the younger ones, 18-24, with adults, positive male approach, male gender. We have also focus groups. We have some guidebooks which we follow, but there's always a question when you have 150 people engaged, then if you really have to, if you have to understand the tangible results, normally the number drops dramatically. So I wanted to understand, maybe in another country, which is not mine, which is the RDC, are there different practices that could be used, and what are the outcome results? And it's something that we continue trying new approaches. Thank you. I hope you got the question.
I did. I've worked in the DRC, and j'habitais au Gabon, jusqu'à côté de la DRC. So I feel like I know Central Africa really well. But I think your question is about what are those techniques? How do you know? What are the ways in which you can approach behavior change around gender norms? And I heard you ask around, like, when you have 150 people in the room. When you have 150 people in the room, that's not going to be behavior change work. That's going to be around knowledge. That's going to be around reflection, which is really important. Getting people to reflect on their gender biases and hearing other people speak about it. And especially for adults, the adult learning model, you want other adults to hear from other adults, their norms, challenge it, talk about it. So it's important. But my top thing would be, if you are trying to change a behavior, which is what we did with choices, voices, and promises, they were true behavior change. It wasn't just knowledge. Let's explore values. Let's see, what's wrong with the current gender norms. They were behavior change. So we had to start with what are the behaviors we're trying to change. If you can't articulate what those behaviors are you're trying to change, you're not going to be able to develop something that's going to change those behaviors. And you're not going to be able to evaluate if those behaviors have changed. So for me, in Nepal, we were like, when we were working with the kids, what were the behaviors? That was the first thing that we had to sit and think through even before we went to talk to the adolescents. So we came up with things that we were hoping to change, like keeping girls in school longer, boys advocating on behalf of their sisters to the parents to not marry them off. We're like, let's talk to the boys and see if that's something they really can do or not. Boys helping out with chores in Nepal so girls can have more time to study. Girls getting to leave at the same time to go to school as boys. Like, these were very specific behaviors we had to articulate. I think we came up with a list of 10. So that when we went out to the community, when we went out to do the formative research, we were able to, one, confirm, are these behaviors you think you'd be able to change or not through some of these techniques? But then we got to play around with all those methods. So let's say, for example, we showed that picture of the kids playing football. Let's say you were sitting here playing football and your sister walked by with a thing of dishes on her head that she was going to wash. What would your other friends, choose an animal that describes how your friends would act if you stopped playing soccer and went to help her? And by hearing how that boy, the friends would interact and how he would interact with them, helped us shape what was possible to change or not. What were those emotional triggers that we could get them to move or not? So behavior change work is very nuanced. Lots of details that you want to tap into. But if you can understand what the behavior is and what the barrier is of them doing that behavior, what the emotional barrier is, you're much more likely to be able to design something to get them to make that change. One other thing you need to know besides the emotional barriers is what I call the emotional end benefit of doing the behavior. So I want this boy to stop playing soccer to go help his sister. The barrier might be some of the names his friends might call him. But the emotional end benefit, might be, and what we heard in Nepal is, I'm going to feel like an honorable brother. And my sister will honor me, because they had a lot of these like ceremonies where sisters honor the brothers through these bracelets they put on them. We heard a lot about that. So I want my sister to honor the good things I do for her. We also heard from the boys, they felt really bad when their sisters were getting physically abused by the parents. Like if they came home and dinner wasn't done right and they got hit. So the boys felt the emotional end benefit of doing that behavior is, maybe I'm helping to protect my sister. That was pretty powerful. So we were able to then design something that says, well, to help them, influence them to feel, if you do X, Y, Z, you'll also be feeling like an honorable brother because you'll helping protect your sister. So again, different ways, different questions to ask, different things to listen to, very different than that big workshop that we often see where people are talking about the norms and why those norms happen. And those are important. It's an important part of this puzzle, but it doesn't necessarily, people who leave those big workshops don't typically change their behaviors right afterwards. You need a little bit extra nudge. So Bene, I hope I answered your question. I don't.
Oui, merci beaucoup pour les interventions.
Yes. Thank you very much. I understand. And also, thank you for this sharing, because I have really got a lot of inputs, and this will help us in the work we're doing in the field. In particular, positive male approach. We have started studying the norms, the behaviors, what we should change. We have basically produced a baseline, and we also follow. We find we are achieving a certain progress, because this is involving a change in their behavior. And I must say that this positive masculinity is having an impact on social norms. And so For example, a boy who's going to help the sister, which are the reaction of their peers, of his friends? Sometimes they might say, next time you won't play with us, you act as a girl. These are really first-hand experiences which are very useful and helpful. And that is going to help us. Maybe after this meeting, we can still have an exchange of views on the best practices to understand how can we truly document our program. We have developed some tools. Outcome investing. These are tools which allow us to document these positive changes, and which basically allows us to use maybe drawings. The example that you said with the animals, for example, the animal representing, these can be, we can also adopt them because I think they're going to be very useful. Thank you.
And I just put in the chat box 2 programs that Bene can look into that I've designed that were also evaluated. One is in Uganda called Real Fathers Project, I think it was. And one in DRC, which was called Bien Grandir, or we also called it in English, Growing Up Great. So do a little Google search or get in contact with the Save the Children colleagues in DRC. Maybe we'll take this one other question before we take the break. I think.
Yes, absolutely. There is a question of Oksana, and perhaps to answer another question in the chat, Maria del Pilar were asking about, is it possible to adapt this strategy to function in an online space or not at all?
To function in what kind of space?
In online, online.
Wow, that's a great question. I've never thought about it. It would have to be very creative and a person that knows what they're doing, because so much of this behavior change work that I've done relies on the interaction of people to reflect on a norm, to come back and hear how those norms might be changing and hear others who might have adopted it faster than you. I think online like this could work with a very good facilitator. I feel like I could facilitate a discussion if everyone had their videos on and kids were talking and we're getting people to listen to each other. But in terms of like a game that people played online, it might hover on knowledge and attitudes and less on behavior. So, but I don't know, that's just my first thoughts.
And we had Oksana. Are you still with us? I can't see you anymore.
Hello. We use some experience with children. We organize every year child rights school and have discussion with children about challenges in their rights, and in school participate girl and boy, and every year we have some issues about gender violence. It's gender norms. It's interesting. We have from children some information about. We provide some research and have information about security. Girls didn't feel safety in public transport in evening. And we have a discussion, focus group about this problem. And problem sexual домогание, посягательство, sexual harassment in the public transport. And also we have discussion with children about some about sexual violence, about some behaviors when maybe not good girl have not good when girl didn't have good experience and have a lot of no, I'm sorry.
I want to pick on your example of girls not getting harassed in public transportation. Can I make a comment on this one?
Yes.
Because if, let's say you hired me as a consultant and you said to me, girls are getting harassed at night when they use public transportation to come home from school or a job. Help us change those behaviors. You know, not of the girls, but maybe of the people who are harassing. So this is where I would start. I would, one, probably have to solicit people who take public transportation at night, men, boys. I would probably first talk to girls who tell me about the guys who are harassing you. What are they doing? How many guys are together? I would want to understand, are they alone or are they together in groups? Because people do act differently when they're in groups with their friends than when they're alone. Then I would want to talk to those boys and hear about, you know, tell me more about why you do that. I'd ask these in different ways, like choose an animal. But I'd want to hear about how they would feel if someone did that to their sister, to their mother. I would want to hear about how they would feel if one of their friends said to them, why are you treating her like that? What's wrong with you? You know, would that ever actually happen? And then I would take all this information and I can imagine us creating a set of posters or something that would be on the bus that would influence and get that person to think about their behavior, because we've identified the behavior is we don't want them to say whatever they say. I think the harassment is probably words they're saying, like, hey, sweetheart, you're so sexy, whatever, inappropriate. And though the behavior is, how do you get men or boys to talk nicely to girls and not inappropriately? Notice I didn't say no talking at all, because that's how you lose the men. But how do you give them a way in which they can still talk to them that is still respectful and still gets the outcome that what they want, which might be to get their number or whatever it is. And so I would work something like that. I remember seeing a poster, 2 posters come to mind that I've seen that I thought were powerful. One was when I was going to the airport in Ethiopia. Big poster of this guy, fancy in his tie, kind of fat, on his cell phone. And all it said on there is, would you want this guy, what was the words? Would you want this guy talking to your daughter and buying her gifts? Question mark. He just looked like, you know. And then underneath it said, so why are you doing it to his? It's like, very emotion based. It was like really made me stop and think. And then another one I think I saw in Uganda, and it was around male circumcision for HIV prevention, because we know as a public health measure, there's less rates of HIV transmission when a greater proportion of men are circumcised. And the poster was emotion-based and influential and all about consensus. And it was so perfectly placed. It was in the bathroom, right in front of the urinal where I was standing going to the bathroom. And it was this really pretty woman who looked like this, looking down. And the tagline said, "You're not circumcised yet? What are you waiting for?" And it was just so smart, because It was building on consensus. Like everyone else is circumcised, and now I see you and I'm shaming you. Why aren't you? And so you would want to, create something that might get people to laugh, get them to think, touch an emotion on the spot, that while they're seeing that and someone else is seeing it, if they harass that girl, they would feel pretty stupid doing it. And that's the different type of behavior change. Now, some people say to me, but Brad, you're not tackling the underlying causes of all this, of machismo and these boys thinking that this is okay. That work still has to happen in some of that group work. But if the behavior you want to change is boys not harassing girls on the bus, that's the behavior that's the approach I would take to try and change that behavior on the spot. So it's interesting. It's interesting. You have to know each behavior.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a lot of things to think about.
All right. Everyone's thinking, enough with the theory. Just tell us what it is you did. We want to know what you did. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk you through choices, then voices, then promises. And then we'll have time for question and answer. If I don't get to the implementation, like fidelity, that's okay. But the exciting part will also, I think it's next week, when Dr. Lundgren, a good friend of mine who did the study, the pre and post test study, and we did a follow-up like a year later to see what kind of changes we had. So we'll start with choices. Our goal of choices was to really challenge how very young adolescents, boys and girls, change their views on restrictive gender norms and promote gender equality. Okay, that's a goal. That's not a behavior. That was just our lofty goal. And the approach we took to do this was to facilitate a set of 9 age-appropriate interactive activities with them. And they were facilitated actually by 15 to 19-year-olds. So we thought it was a little too young to have a 10-year-old facilitating, but we did it by 15 to 19-year-olds who were supported by an adult. So I'm not going to read all of this, but you can, the point I think I wanted to make here is each activity was very fun. These are 10, 11, 12-year-olds. Some of it was not really tangible. For example, the color of hope, number 2. Understand how boys can inspire girls in the household through a showing of affection. This session talked a lot about how do you know, it even started off with the statement, what's the color of the wind? What is the color of the wind? There is no answer to that. You can't see it, but you can feel the wind. You can feel it when it's around you. What is it? What does the wind do? And the young people say, oh, well, it dries our clothes. It cools us off when it's hot. So everyone knows the effect of the wind, but you can't see it. So hope is kind of like that. How do you know when there's hope in your household? So this whole session talked about hope. It never told boys what to do. And it wasn't even about gender. Almost none of our sessions were about gender, actually. It never said the word gender because it took me a long time to understand what gender was. It took me a long time to understand what a gender norm is. So we didn't use those words with 10 to 14-year-olds. We talked about hopes, about dreams, showing you care, not being afraid to show you care. I think there's some more here. We talked about an invisible wall. I love the invisible wall. The kids loved it. Those are the barriers that hold people back from doing things. So, like that session, we asked kids, tell us, what's the purpose of a wall and fence? Yeah, they keep the animals in. They keep the neighbors from knowing where their property line is, keep strangers out. That's the purpose of a wall. Well, have you ever seen an invisible wall? Like, most of them have never seen one. And I said, well, let's share some examples. there's this boy playing football with his friends, and his sister walks by with all this clothes on her head, going to wash it, and she looks pretty tired. And that brother wants to stop and help her wash those clothes. But there's this invisible wall holding him back from doing that. Have you guys ever felt that invisible wall? Have you ever felt something holding you back from something you want to do, but you don't do it? And then we start discussing that invisible wall. What is that? What is this invisible wall? Why didn't this boy go help? What would his friends say? So again, these are the same things we were learning during the formative research, and we put it right into the sessions. And we ended up calling it the invisible wall because we heard the boys say, well, I want to help, but it's like you feel held back by what your friends might say to you. And so we had them start discussing, well, what might friends say? What would you say back? How could you save face if you were to do that by the words you would say to your friends? The kids love that because it was very real and very tangible, and they've all felt the invisible wall at some point in their lives. So you can see through all of these, we never really talked about gender norm. Today we're going to talk about gender norms. This is what a gender is. This is what sex is, boy, girl. Gender, well, that's a social construct. These are big issues. We didn't do that. We focused on the behaviors. We wanted boys to help girls with chores. We talked about the invisible wall that holds them back. We talked about how they could feel if they did help her, and what could they say to their friends to make them save face. And if they could get those things, they're much more likely to do that behavior. At the end, during a single step, we had them take public pledges, like what are the few things you can do to help your sister, to change the norms? And they would say those things and make a commitment to do them. So really, really different work. It all happened in small groups. It depends on the country. Some of them did it, boys and girls alone. Some bring them together. These kids on the left are the ones who are facilitators. They were trained to facilitate these 9 discussions. There was always an adult there to help. And you can see on the right, the girl in the white is facilitating that discussion with this small group. And it's intimate, but it's a discussion. And they get up. There's a lot of activities and games they do, but it's that's what Choices looks like. 9 activities done in small group. And so it takes time. It takes money. You're training young people. We all know that young people, when you train them to lead sessions, sometimes they leave. They don't have as much time, or they have to go, they're more transient. But this is what Choices looks like. It's a curriculum. It's 9 sessions. This is Rebecca. This is just a plug to come next week because this is the study we published based on our results. Rebecca is the researcher. I'm the guy here. And we were the top 25 most read gender articles of that year. What year was this? 2013. So we have really good results. But I think we influenced people to read this because we had a cool title. Whose turn to wash the dishes? And maybe we were just being influential. Because of the results we had, Choices we brought it everywhere. People really heard about it. They wanted to adapt it. These are 8 different countries that I helped bring it to, but I think today it's probably in 15 countries. And each country, we started from the beginning. We talked to kids. We used those plastic animals. We heard what their emotional end benefits would be. We heard what the barriers would be. And those 9 sessions changed over time. Each country had something new. So we were creative enough to bring in different type of ideas based on their context. So, it's really important to be adaptable. Okay, so that's Choices. Now I'm going to bring you to Voices, which is totally different. It is not a curriculum. Voices, our goal here, again, was to influence parents' behaviors to increase gender equity for their children. And you see on the cover, he says, using testimonials to influence parent support for very young adolescents. So our goal was to increase dialogue between parents and very young adolescents that diminishes intergenerational transfer of inequitable gender norms and improved quality in the household. That's a mouthful. I'm not sure if you understood that goal. We're just trying to get parents to talk nicer to their kids and not instill gender norms that put girls at a disadvantage. The approach was through these facilitated group dialogues following a video. So the parents would come together, watch a video that we made, and then have a dialogue about it. We created 6 videos for 6 different behaviors that we identified. You can see the behaviors I've put in kind of yellow here. Whoops, let's go back. Sorry. So the video 1, the behavior was for parents to evenly divide household tasks amongst boys and girls. Video 2 was about making that decision to keep girls in school. 3 was committing to not discuss marriage until their daughter is older. Video 4 was asking boys and girls to share their hopes and dreams with them and have that kind of dialogue. Video 5 was providing equal food for boys and girls. And video 6 was how do you bring hope to your boys and girls, your sons, your daughters equally. These were the behaviors that we chose after doing our formative research with parents. And from those behaviors, we developed testimonial videos. So I wonder if we can play one. Let's see if it's possible. I'm not sure if it's even worth it, but I can send these later. These are all hyperlinked. They're on YouTube, so you can watch them. But the most important part when you watch these videos is they are real people. We found people who are doing the behaviors we were trying to change. And we had them talk about, why did you make that change? What led to you making that change? What was hard about you making that change? What would you say to someone else who was going to make that change? And we got these people who lived in villages and looked just like everyone else we were working with. These were not people from the capital city. They were in those same villages. And we filmed them in their homes doing the things that they do. And they were very influential. It was just like that sign. People like you who stay in this hotel made this change. That was the influence we were looking for. So these were our voices doing the interviews were always taken out. It was only the voice of these parents, these children, talking about the changes they made, why they made them, why it was hard. And then after that video, let me see if I had. Okay, I'm going to show you what it looks like to show a video in a rural Nepali village. Everyone's crowded into a small little home. We have these tiny little projectors, solar powered. There's a solar panel. We would put up a sheet. We had a little speaker. I don't know if it's here. They would watch it. And then this facilitator would have a discussion with them. The videos were about 8-10 minutes long. That's it. The discussion would last about 40 minutes long. So the discussion would be like, wow, what surprised you about that video? Let them talk about what surprised them. What made you happy? What made you sad? You know, even the way we ask questions are emotion-based, very open. Does anyone here know someone who made a change like this? Again, a lot easier to talk about other people than yourself. What would happen if you made this change? What would people say? And so you get people talking about it. The idea for us was that choices lasted 9 sessions, and they would do one a month, I think is how we planned it. And we wanted these videos to happen because parents are busy. They don't have the time to come every single week. We wanted these videos to happen once a month as well, like a month after Choices started. So you start Choices up with the kids, and then you invite all their parents. These are those the parents of the kids going through Choices to come watch the video, have a discussion, go out, make a commitment. Can we commit to trying something new before we come back together next month? When they come back together next month, some of them would talk about, well, what did you try it? How did it go? Was it hard? And then they would watch a separate video on a different behavior and have a same discussion. So again, that interaction between the kids doing something, the parents doing something different. All right, that's voices. So now the last part is promises. This one was more around, I think this didn't get changed, but it's more around influencing. It's a community-based approach to influence parents' behaviors, to support the parents that want to make changes, so they feel there would be support out in the community for what they're doing, so that they felt there is a sense of consensus in their community around these same behaviors that they were watching in those videos. So that was the goal, to shift the norm within the community where girls felt like they were more valued to go to school, for example, or less domestic violence. And the approach was actually a set of posters that were placed in the community over time, a small discussion with a small group of influencers who would talk about it later on their own. So how do you do that? First, we had to identify who are these influential people in a community that talk a lot, that people listen to. And it's not always the community leader. Sometimes it's that neighbor who always seems to know what's going on, whose kids are always going to school on time. Maybe that's the neighbor that everyone trusts. Maybe not. Maybe it's the woman who struggles, but there's something about the way she talks to her neighbors that they listen to her. She's wise, she's smart. She would never went to school. So the only way to do that is you ask people, who's the type of person in this village you take advice from? And you start to see who everyone takes advice from. And you want to bring those people in because when you work with them, they're more likely to influence others. So what we did was we invited them to, well, let me show you a poster first. We designed 7 different posters, one for each month. Those same months that Choices was happening, the same months that parents were watching the videos, we designed these posters that would be on billboards. We put 3 different billboards in the community, one at the market, one outside of the school where the kids were dropping their kids off, and somewhere else, maybe at the health center. And we just had those posters there all month, getting people to think. They were designed very colorful because this is what, in Nepal, it looks like a Bollywood video, movie poster. That's what they wanted. It needs to look fun and catchy. That's what's going to get people's attention. And they were very influential. They used quotes of the children, of the parents, of the people we were trying to influence. And we had an artist draw pictures of those things. So poster 1 was around raising community awareness of hopes and dreams of girls. There was actually quotes of the hopes and dreams of girls in their community. We wanted people to see those, that they have hopes and dreams. And it went on. So we would put up a poster here's one example. The hopes and dreams that we as parents have for our daughters. We hope our daughter will be educated. I hope my daughter will have a better life than us. We hope our daughter will have the skills that lead to her financial security. I mean, these are the things that parents were saying to us. These were the same parents who might have been marrying their daughter off early and not going to, and having them pulled out of school. But they still had hopes and dreams for them. So for us, how do we get these parents over that barrier to keep them in school? So we were focusing on those hopes and dreams. So other parents can see, wow, there's other parents in the community that have the same hopes and dreams we have. Maybe we should all talk about this more. maybe it should be out in the open. So we would invite a smaller group of people who were identified as being influential to that day that we put the poster up. We would talk about it. We would tell, say why, what we heard, and we would say, go talk about it. We wouldn't force them. We weren't paying them. We didn't say, you need to go talk to 10 people about this. We were just using them because they were influencers. We knew that people listened to them, and we knew they're the type of people who talk. And later in our evaluation, we wanted to see, does the information filter down? So yeah, the last thing we did, though, was right here. I'm going to go back. The last month, we did a community celebration. So at the end of choices, all the videos were watched. The last poster was up, was poster 7. This one had a space where people made commitments in their community to do something. And so we would have a big ceremony and a celebration and make it fun. And we would highlight again testimonials of people who already changed. And other people were coming and say, we want to keep our girl in school until this age. And they would say this in front of their peers and their neighbors, and they would write it on the board. So we were trying to influence, not force. If it's forced, it doesn't work. But we were trying to influence people to publicly talk to their commitments to their neighbors and pledge that they would do it. Because we know the research says if they publicly make that commitment, they're much more likely to do it. Now, we didn't send people out to make sure they did it. We just based our knowledge on the research. We wanted to get them to publicly make that commitment. So I was going to stop here so you can ask questions, but maybe I'll quickly go through this and I'll do one question session at the end. So we did that implementation. We went out, we had Rebecca Lundgren set up a whole research study where we had a control group, an experimental group. We did choices with a group of kids, voices with their parents, and promises in their neighborhoods. And we went through we were supposed to go through a whole 7 months and then do a post-evaluation. So I just want to show you, sometimes things don't go as planned. You plan it, but what really happens are 2 different things. So we planned for this to happen month 1, 2, 3, starting month 4 in April. We plan to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months of implementation with voices happening. They actually would have been 6, 7, 8, 9. I think the X's went off because there were 9 sessions. Whoops. There were 9 sessions, so this should be XXX with 3 sessions of video watching. They were going to watch 2 videos at each session, and then we were going to unveil 2 posters a month during this time. That was the plan. And then things happened, like an earthquake. There was an earthquake in Nepal. There were strikes. So we had to shorten the amount of time. So we actually had to do it over 1, 2.5 months instead of 9. So we had to also shorten the number of video watching sessions to 2. I mean, they watched 3 videos here and 3 videos here. So this changed the way we wanted it to run. Anyway, there was a lot of external factors that led to that change. I do think it's always important to do monitoring of what you plan to do and what really happens, because that, I think, has an effect on your results. And one of our big lessons learned, that's not new really, but we know these things are difficult to change. So what the work we were doing was a start of a longer term discussion, yet we still saw behavior change. But we were interested in, would those behaviors turn back if we didn't have a longer term approach to continuing with this work? A lot of people always say, well, how long does it take to actually, who did you train to do all this work? So this is how we did it. These are the steps that we took. We first did interactive gender training for our own staff and our partners who were working on this. We wanted our own values to be explored before we did this work externally. Then we chose our boys and girls to be facilitators. One boy and one girl worked together in a child club, and they were trained. They went through a 5-day training, and that was their work. Then we did a training for the community mobilizers who were going to lead the video voices discussions. So they also got trained so that when those sessions happened, they were able to facilitate the discussion. And we also had to train those same mobilizers in 2 days. When you invite those influencers to each poster, how do you have those discussions? So we had a manual for voices of what those facilitated discussions would look like, and same with promises. But this is the level of training that it took. I think I'm not going to go through the rest. I'm just going to stop here because you're going to get a lot of results. I'm going to stop here. In the end, you know, once people come, sometimes you don't get as many people coming to that first video, but when there's a buzz going around, they all want to see the next one. So shortening it into 2 sessions didn't work for us well because we had less people come in the beginning and more at the end. If we had it 3 or 4 sessions and only did 1 video each time, we think we would have gotten more and more people each time. So that would be my advice. Anyway, let me stop sharing. And let's open it up for questions because that's really the whole presentation. Rebecca will go through the results with you and you'll learn a little bit about the measures she used because it's not easy to measure gender norms as well as the results.
Thank you for this presentation. I find this session today wonderful, particularly because you are presenting concrete on the field experiences. I would like to understand better the name of each session, and also what kind of mechanism did you use for the implementation? Is there a follow-up in the community to make sure that these changes are sustainable or long-lasting, rather? And my second concern is, how did you cope with these, walls, the forms of resistance, those who resisted the change? How did you cope with them? Thank you.
Okay, great. Great questions. In terms of follow-up, that's a good question. When it makes me realize I forgot to say something. We designed choices, voices, and promises as an innovation within a much larger project we were already doing. So we work in these communities. We didn't just come in and say, here, we have something new. We were already working in child clubs. We have long-term development 10-year programs in these communities. So that would be my suggestion as well. This is like a good add-on in something else that you're doing. You saw you doing a program and there's harassment of girls on the bus, and you want to design something that works with girls and boys, works with their parents, works in the community, you would add it into a program you're already doing. That way you have that longer term follow-up and that ability to come back and measure and see what you can encourage. In terms of the second part of your question, which I'm forgetting, I should have wrote it down. Diana, do you remember it? Mechanism, something about mechanism.
Yes, I can repeat it. The second part of my question is the resistance, if you found resistance in terms of changes, and how did you cope with them? Did you document the changes? How were you able to maybe also document these forms of resistance?
Yes.
So how did you cope and how did you document them?
Okay,
both?
the resistance, I'm not going to talk about like larger community resistance. Like how could you come here and talk and change our norms? We did this, and again, we already worked in these communities. They trusted Save the Children. They trusted our local partners. So we didn't have that kind of resistance. They already knew we were doing work on early marriage and gender norms. And so that stuff wasn't new. But the resistance was more at the individual levels that came out in those dialogues. You know, those invisible walls are resistance. And that is good. You want that to come out because you want to challenge people to say, well, when you hear people say that, do you feel powerful enough to still make a change or not? And you want people to start reflecting and talking about that. So you actually want people to come out and say those things so that you can have them work through it a little bit. Like, why are they saying that? And you want to do this at a level. You know, their behavior change is like a bell curve. Everyone knows the bell curve, right? You're going to have 10% of people who take on your change like the first time they hear you speak. They call them the early adopters. It might even be 20%. And then you're going to have 10% of people who will never, ever take on your change. My word of advice for anyone doing behavior change work is you forget about those 10% of people who will never take on your change. Don't waste your time on them. And don't give them a platform to be negative and resistant when you're doing your work. So sometimes you have to know that. You have to know, like, who are our resistors? Because we don't want them part of this discussion because that's all they're going to talk about. And they'll intimidate people. But 80% of people fall in that middle and can be influenced either way. And so you just have to let your work see which way they get influenced. You can't force people to change. But yeah. That's my advice. It's okay. You don't bring the resistors in, the ones that will never change, but you do get people to reflect on what's holding them back from changing. And sometimes what's holding them back are what other people would say and think and feel about them to take away status recognition. And then you say, well, what could you do to gain status, gain recognition, you know, be a valued person in your house or your community? What we do know, sometimes I start my sessions, like when I was working with fathers, you know, Bene, you said you were working on positive masculinity. And I put that resource in about this Real Fathers project I developed. I knew the behaviors I wanted to work on with these fathers were them playing with their children, singing to their children, being emotional with their children, caring for their children emotionally, as well as financially. They already were doing financial. I wanted them to not hit their wives because that has effects on children. Like, these were the behaviors. And so when I came, well, I'm never the one who comes to introduce a program, but when I was working with our staff, one of the best ways when you say to men or anyone else, do you want to know the secret of how to be the best father in the village? The father that all the other neighbors are going to say, whoa, that guy is an amazing father. Who doesn't want to be that person? You know, when you put it that way, everyone wants to be that guy. Everyone wants to be the one that everyone's talking about in a positive way. And say, look, we have the secrets for you. We have those things that are going to make you the one that people talk about, because your kids will respect you. They will listen to you. They will love you, and you'll love them back. And so, you know, again, you already, when you appeal to people from an emotion-based standpoint, right from the day one beginning, it's just more powerful. Think about it. Think about all of the trainings you've ever done. It takes just usually an hour to go through an agenda, to go through, this is what we're going to do. Here are the behaviors we want to change. It's all logic-based. Think about the next time you do a workshop or a presentation to start off emotion-based. And I could have done that too today, and I didn't. But to say, hey, if I came here to say, do you guys want to know the secret to how to change gender norms? Because I will make you look like the best people in your organizations, because you will know how to get everyone to be more gender equitable. Of course, you already feel that. You feel excited to hear this. You want to know what those secrets are, because I'm appealing to your emotions more than and I'm also appealing to you being recognized in your own organization for being such a good worker, because we too need to be recognized and have status. So anyway, it works for everything. These influence principles work for a lot of things. Anyway, that was a very long way to answer Bene's question about resistance. But, you know, hit it from an emotion standpoint. Don't bring the resistors in. Don't give them a platform, and just do your best. I know my colleague put a link in one of the chats earlier on where you can get all these resources. I think you can download these resources. You could read them. You can see if they would work in your, where you live. We have versions in Arabic. We have versions in French, versions in Spanish. But I wouldn't pick it off the shelf and just use it. I would say, this seems really interesting. What would we need to do to adapt it? And I would go through that adaptation process.
So while we are waiting for more questions, I was wondering if we are working in a country, if some of our partner is working in a country where you already have choices, how they can work with Save the Children, or indicate, I don't know, some location where such trainings are needed, how this cooperation is possible.
Well, one, they can either contact our offices in that country directly. Some of them, sometimes it's hard to find the right people who have worked on it. They can also go through you, through us. You're connected to Callie's team. Callie's team would be able to find those people and sometimes make those connections as well. So yeah, I wouldn't come to me because I am leaving. I'm starting a new chapter of my life at the end of July.
Congratulations.
I'm still going to work in behavior change, but locally in my community, and try and get behavior change around climate change and environmental impact right here. And trust me, I'll be using all of these principles for sure.
Because I see we have partners in many countries you cited, and I said I just can see a thank you from our colleagues from Kyrgyzstan. And I saw that choices were implemented in Kyrgyzstan.
Kyrgyzstan, yeah, it was.
So perhaps it would be interesting to contact. And our colleague from Ukraine, Oksana, who were asking the question, they have actually implemented the program called Youth Voices. That's through this questionnaire, through this work with young people, they learned about all these different violences, and in particular about this harassment on public transportation. Children were anxious about.
Yeah.
So it's all this interesting, to see others' practices and not to reinvent all the time, but to to learn.
Thank you for this excellent presentation. I think we all know about what you talk about, the feeling, the choices, and how do you approach the issue is different. How do you address the issue is different? That is the main interesting part that I have noticed. We talk about choices, about voices, and also about promises. What about the challenges? That is my first question. The second one, you talk about, you base your presentation on the situation in Nepal. I don't know if you were in a position or able with your colleagues in Western parts to also document or work on such gender issues, and how do you approach that? Is that this approach different from what you've done in a country like Nepal? Yeah, those are the two questions I want to put forward. And once again, thank you for the presentation.
Yes. All right, thank you, Yao. I think to answer your second question first, this approach is very different than what we've done around gender in the past. We've taken mostly, and we still do both side by side, but we take a more traditional approach to doing like workshops to help people reflect on their gender norms and think through, what are those norms in the country or in the community that have negative effect, and like why, how did this happen? Where did it come from? Can things be different in this new generation? We still do a lot of that work. But this one, now in those countries can be coupled with this behavior change work. In terms of challenges, I would say we're all this, the challenge is gender inequality. That's the challenge it's all working towards. The names, choices, voices, and promises are really just reflective of what we were trying to do with each of those groups we were working with. We wanted children to feel that they had a choice. They can choose different hopes and dreams for their future. But also, if you're a boy who is harassing a girl or not helping, that's also a choice. Like, you have the choice to help your sister with chores. There might be a lot of things influencing that choice, but it's still your choice at the end of the day, what you choose to do or not. And that was, when you read choices, it always starts with, if you, at the end, we always end with something, if you had the choice, which one would you choose? To sit and watch your sister struggle all by herself or help her out? You know, we kind of start doing that in the book. With voices, we wanted to capitalize on the voices of parents who made changes. We wanted to hear their voices. That's why it was all testimonial video. And we wanted parents to use their voices to talk with their children and to make change in their own household. With promises, which was much more at the community level, we really wanted communities to promise to protect children, promise to make changes, or a community doesn't make change, but we wanted that promise of a community where change can be possible. So I would say challenges is all part of all that. There's a new one that was being written by my education colleagues called Commitments. This was work they were doing with teachers in the primary school, and the commitments they were going to make to not treat boys and girls different in the primary school setting. And so the teachers had to go through a whole bias training, like, why are they treating boys and girls different? What's the commitments they would make so that a boy and a girl could have the same hope and dream and opportunity? So yeah, I hope that answers your question. And what country are you from, Yao? Did you say Malawi or?
I'm from Togo.
From Togo. Ah, cool. Yeah, I'm trying to think, like, I don't think we have a West African version, but maybe the work we did in Bien Grandir in DRC might be relevant. Some of that work also looked at gender norms. We made a whole game that you put out on the floor and kids play it. We had a whole bunch of other tools, but it was all kind of the same, developed in the same way.
And we have now a question in the chat box. Whatever subjects you are working on with the adolescents who are going to facilitate the group discussion? What is they learning? What they are learning before starting facilitating group discussions?
Like, is that question like the subjects within choices when we do choices, or?
Yes. When you're preparing youth facilitators, adolescent facilitators, what they are learning during this preparation?
They really learn how to be good facilitators, because the content is all, like, what to say and what to do is all written in the manual, but it's more of like, how do you facilitate that dialogue? What happens when there's someone resisting? You know, the facilitators are learning more about how to manage that conversation, how to do the activities that are in there. And of course, they learn a little bit about gender and gender norms.
I think we are going to resume if we don't have any more questions. I would like to really thank you very much to this session. Very interesting presentation. Not only about this concrete program, but the whole way of thinking about how to design really a program to change harmful behaviors. So it's a good example of the whole way of thinking differently in our implementation. And as you've already said, we are going to have with us Rebecca Landgren, who was the original researcher who worked with Save the Children to evaluate the program on May 27 at our usual time at 4 p.m. Paris time. So it will be a good continuation of this discussion.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's amazing how many people came from so many countries. So I wish you guys all the best.
Thank you so much.
Right. Bye, everybody.